could you take us to the beginning of the company? Tell us how it was founded and how it has evolved over the past few years.
Sure. So it's a spin out from the University of Helsinki. As you mentioned, Finland is great for innovation, and it's the government is investing heavily in biotech innovation. And the University of Helsinki is the premier university in Finland. They're blessed with a number of very good universities, but the University of Helsinki, in terms of innovation and its track record, is exceptional. And the head of what's called the Immunology, Virology and Therapeutics Laboratory, called the IVT Laboratory at the university, is led by Professor Vincenzo Cerullo, who's the scientific founder. He's the guy who came up with the idea for PeptiCRAD and all the various technologies within the company. Vincenzo is a brilliant inventor. He's a brilliant scientist. He's a real lateral thinker. But what really drove him for this particular concept was the fact that his son, his very young son, as a baby, developed a rare form of rhabdomyosarcoma, form of cancer. And he, being an immunologist involved with viruses, knew about the oncolytic virus space. So he was really motivated to think outside the box, to think about how we could develop better treatments for his son. The good news is that his son is alive and well and is now cleared the cancer. It was about now 6 years ago. It's the combination, essentially, of bringing together the oncolytic virus with the peptides, the tumor-specific or cancer-specific peptides. That was that moment, that eureka moment that led to PeptiCRAD, and the spin out of the company from the University of Helsinki back in 2016. The innovation is essentially the glue, the ability to coat the oncolytic virus, the virus that selectively infects and cancer cells, which many companies are developing. There are about 20 oncolytic virus companies around the world. And then there's also a lot of people developing tumor-specific peptides. These are sort of the signatures that, if you can train the immune system to recognize that signature, and if you can find that signature on the cancer cell, then the immune system will recognize the cancer cell as foreign, what we call non-self, and clear it. I mean, that's what the immune system is doing all the time. Every day, with most of us, we're all developing abnormal cells that have abnormal growth, which are on the way to becoming cancer. And the immune system recognizes the abnormal proteins on their surface and clears these. It's the oncolytic virus on the one side and the peptides. And what's unique is that we have the technology, a patented technology, that allows you to combine the peptides and coat the virus with those peptides, so that when you inject the oncolytic virus into the cancer, into the nodule, you're getting delivery of both an oncolytic virus plus what's called a neoantigen or a peptide payload that then trains the immune system to develop these cells. These are called CD8 positive killer T cells. These are the intelligence arm of the immune system. And once they've been trained up, they can then develop clones of those specific killers, those killer T cells, that then can go around the body looking for any cells, abnormal cells that express that particular peptide signature. What we essentially doing is we are educating the immune system to known targets, so that when the checkpoint inhibitor is applied, the umbrella, the protection of the cancer cell from the immune system is taken away. You've then got a lot of T cells that are ready to go in and kill the cancer. So it works very synergistically with the checkpoint inhibitors. And that's related to the fact that there are now 7.5 billion of us on this planet. We're encroaching onto our ecosystems, and we need to be much better protected. And again, China needs to shut down their wild animal market immediately. I mean, they've said they have, but I've been told that that's not really true. There's still a lot of cultural change that needs to happen. People need to understand that this is very serious, and that we need to make sure that we protect our ecosystems much more effectively.
Absolutely.
But that we also do not allow trade in wild animals. I mean, that's just insane. It's insanity to continue with that. And I think that's an important message to come from the biotechnology sector.
And I understand that Valo is also doing work on, well, I think you announced it at the end of April that you started doing work on developing a COVID vaccine. So what's the status of this? And are you using the same PeptiCRAD technology as well?
Yes, it's very similar. So,
Yeah.
so the first thing I'd say, we ourselves are not developing a vaccine. What we can do is partner with others that are developing viral vaccines, to partner with them to enable them to use our technology to extend the efficacy and the duration of the immune response. And so the technology, PeptiCRAD technology, PeptiCRAD is a mouthful, but it stands for peptide-coated conditionally mutating adenovirus. So it applies specifically to an adenovirus. But we also have a very similar technology called PeptiEnv, which has applied the same concept of coating envelope viruses with peptides, using ENV, which stands for coated envelope viruses. And basically, in the immuno-oncology space, we are coating with tumor-specific peptides, that adenovirus, and we're coating an oncolytic adenovirus. In the vaccine space, of course, we don't need to coat an oncolytic virus. We can coat any adenovirus or envelope virus. And by coating, and we're coating them with what's called SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, those specific peptides. And we're selecting those peptides, and we also have a technology out of the University of Helsinki, which we are engaged with, and we're working with Professor Cerullo's team with that selection technology, which allows you not just to select for tumor peptides that might be immunogenic, but for any virus or SARS-CoV-2 specific peptides that are likely to be immunogenic, that are not spike protein, because everybody's going after spike protein, right? Everyone's looking for that neutralizing antibody. What a virus does very effectively, particularly the adenovirus, but there are other viruses too, but particularly the adenovirus. And that's why there are at least 4 companies out there using an adenovirus as the vector for the delivery of their vaccine. And they're using a genetically engineered virus. Then that basically they're all using and targeting, of course, the spike protein and looking to develop neutralizing antibody. But what viruses are very good is also inducing the cell-mediated immune response as opposed to the antibody, the humoral immune response. So we've got these 2 adaptive arms of the immune response. One humoral, antibody producing, neutralizing antibody, neutralizing the virus. So the antibody finds the virus, there are cells that then recognize, the immune cells that recognize the virus is bound by the antibody, and they then clear and kill that complex. So that's the neutralizing antibody. On the other side, you've got the cell-mediated immune response, and those are the killer T cells, the CD8 in particular, killer T cells I talked about earlier in the immuno-oncology space. The same thing happens for infectious disease. The virus infects cells, of course. The virus needs a cell to replicate itself, the host cell. So once it's infected, those host cells, of course, are co-opted essentially by the virus. And the way you then need to clear the virus is by clearing those cells, those infected cells. And you do that by using the CD8 positive killer T cells to recognize the abnormal viral protein on their surface, and they go in and kill and clear the cells, the whole cells. So so once you've been exposed to the virus and you start getting infected, you need to mobilize. For this particular virus, it's very clear that you need to mobilize not just your humoral, the antibody neutralizing, but you also need to mobilize your cell-mediated immune response. And our approach is to select for peptides that allow you to sort of select for those peptides that are going to drive the cell-mediated immune response, targeting what we call the non-structural proteins. So proteins that are expressed by the virus. So so you're getting a double hit, 2 shots on goal, where you've got the spike protein, but then you've got the virus coated with peptides that have a different viral target. And coronavirus strategy. And that's probably more important. So it's looking to the future. So, well, 2 things. One is, what if this virus mutates? We know that its mutation rate is 3 times slower than the influenza virus, which is good news, but it's still mutating. So it's possible that in 3 years' time, we're going to be dealing with
another
just like with the influenza vaccine, you need to change it
every year. Yes.
This one we might need to change, say, once every 2 or 3 years. We don't know yet, or maybe in a year's time. We just don't know.
Yeah.
And so
right.
This will allow you to respond very quickly, rather than to then have to manufacture another whole new batch of virus, which is genetically engineered. This strategy allows you to simply the peptides, which are much easier to produce and much cheaper and much faster. So so the point about this is that it's rapidly adaptable to any mutation or any future pandemic.
On the other hand, there's also a growing movement of anti-vaccination or anti-vaxxers around the world. I need to ask you about this because, well, one, even if it's been reported that people who were previously anti-vaccination are now slowly starting to change their mind because of the pandemic, there's still a significant number of people. And France, for example, has been singled out as the most vaccine skeptic country in Europe. I'd like to know your thoughts on this, but I think more importantly for us, how do we improve vaccine education, especially at this really critical time?
That's a very important point. So I happened to, a previous startup that I did with University College London, I happened to be based at the Royal Free Hospital, which is part of the UCL campus. It's one of the teaching hospitals as part of University College London. And so I was aware, in fact, a chap called Andrew Wakefield was a surgeon at that hospital.
Oh, I see.
So I sort of witnessed almost, I was,
oh dear,
we overlapped by just 1 year, but it was pretty much around that time. I was working with him a couple of years later, but I knew, and all the colleagues, and I knew quite a lot about how that happened and how this whole MMR scandal happened, and it was a scandal. It was the fact that one individual who isn't a statistician, isn't an epidemiologist, knew nothing about infectious diseases. He was a GI surgeon, and he was doing research on Crohn's disease, and he was looking for correlations as to why certain kids develop Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. And he noticed, so he had a whole lot of data, and he saw a correlation between, the only thing that came up, essentially, is my understanding, was that there was a correlation between autism and the MMR vaccine. But of course, if you think about it, autism is diagnosed between the age of sort of 18 months and 2 years, when the personality is forming. It's when it's really becomes self-evident. Under the age of 1, you don't diagnose autism in particular, unless it's unbelievably severe, I guess. But certainly as the personality, so you get, of course, booster around that time, the same time. So of course, in parents' minds, they made the association between having had the booster shot for the MMR and the diagnosis of autism. The two are correlated, but they're not causal in any way, shape, or form. They might have been, but they clearly, lots of research subsequently shows they're absolutely not. And he made the mistake also, the way he recruited his patients, that famous paper that was published in The Lancet, which was then retracted. The Lancet then investigated and said, no, your research is uncommon. The reason was that they put an advert in the paper, in the local Ham and High newspaper in the local area, recruiting patients by basically putting their minds, have you noticed, if your child's been diagnosed with autism, and have you noticed any, were they recently vaccinated? In other words, putting into people's mind that association. Now, if you're a parent with a sick child, or a child that's just been, not sick, but just been diagnosed with something like autism,
well, of course, you'll find something.
And so he self-selected for those people who thought there was a correlation. So it wasn't, proper research in that respect. And so, it's very difficult for people to climb down, I think, particularly certain personalities. And, my understanding, he's now running a whole vaccine research unit in the United States, backed by people who've got kids with autism, of course. because it seemed very credible, right? There was and is a correlation, but it's not, it's clearly not causal. And if you look at the, the outbreaks now of measles that are happening around the world, it's a disaster for kids getting measles, and particularly if they get, the very severe forms of measles, die from it completely unnecessarily, because the vaccine is incredibly safe. The way to educate people is to say, look, everything that we do has risk. Everything in healthcare. You do the simplest blood test, you can get a false positive, and then you go down a whole track based on a false positive that ends up with some sort of procedure, and then you have some reaction to the procedure and you die. I mean, so even the simplest little blood test, can have a false positive, a detrimental impact. So everything has risk. You cross the road, you're taking a risk. You get on an airplane, you're taking a risk. Your lifetime chance of dying in an airplane crash on average is about 1 in 20,000, right? So we tolerate that risk. Your lifetime risk of dying in a car, depending on where you live in the world, can be anything from 1 in 150 to 1 in 1,000, or in some places it can be 1 in 100, 1 in 50. And we wear seatbelts, and we tolerate that risk. So I think the important message to people, and to try and educate from the industry, is to say, look, everything has risk. You as a parent deciding to vaccinate your child, or deciding whether to have this COVID-19 vaccine that's going to be coming down the pipe, weigh up the risk. And it's a personal, individual choice. But here's the data, right? If you don't have this, and you're, say, 85 years old, and you've got a, heart disease, and you're a bit overweight, and, your risk of dying of this, if you get this infection, which you almost certainly will, over time, because it's not going to go away, anytime soon. And, for example, influenza virus never goes away. It comes back every year. There's a seasonal outbreak, right? But we've learned to vaccinate the elderly and the vulnerable, so that it's not such an impact for them. And we tolerate that risk. So you say to people, look, you've got in your particular setting, you're 85, you've got comorbidities that put you in a very high risk category. You've got a 50-50 chance of dying if you get this virus. Probably wise to take the vaccine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, given the safety studies that will be done, and of course you have to do the safety studies, the risk of a vaccine doing anything to you is very small, right? And so I think we're going to need to come up with very clear messaging around the risk-reward profile. Is that there's going to need to be clear education, and I think we need to dust off the MMR vaccine scandal. I think we need to make it clear to people what happened, what was actually the data, and how it was collected that made the link between the MMR and autism. I don't think enough people are aware of just how poorly done that science was.
As the most digital startups per capita in the world, and Valo Therapeutics is a startup. So I think what we'd like to know is, what exactly is it about Finland that makes it such a fertile ground for innovation?
And wonderful country. What makes it special is that, in my view, it's simple. Education, education, education. They have one of the best childhood education programs in the world. They, number one, they don't start their kids too early. They only start the formal education at the age of 7. Here in the UK, we started at 5. And they let their kids play. They let them kids explore in the nursery in a completely unstructured environment until the age of 7. And I think that's very, very important. The Finnish approach is they want kids to be kids until the age of 7. They want them to form their own personalities, their own characters, to play and interact with each other, and interact with adults and the world and the community, but not in a highly structured, pressured environment. And then from 7 onwards, they don't have any testing. It's extraordinary. So, until much later, until the kids are in their teens. And even then, it's done in a particular kind of way. So I think the world can learn a lot from the Finnish childhood. It starts in childhood. The kids are, my experience of the adults who've been through that system, are that they are emotionally mature and emotionally integrated people, much more so than elsewhere in the world. I have to say, it's quite striking.
Right.
And I think that their innovation comes from that that ability to explore and be curious. I think that drives their innovation, their willingness to try things out. They also have a government that is really very supportive. It's almost always a coalition government. There's almost never one dominant party. They also have a woman prime minister, which is always
Santa Marin. Yes. Yeah.
I think it's always a good time. And particularly, like, if you look at Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, an incredible job. I mean, she's just, incredible. And so I think it's the government is also very supportive. And there's many sort of funding initiatives, and we benefit. Valo Therapeutics benefits enormously from one such initiative from Business Finland, which is the government agency that helps innovative startups like ourselves really grow. I'm a medical doctor, and also I have a doctorate in physiological sciences, particularly in immunology. I'm the MD PhD in immunology. And as part of that, I understand physiology very well. And the way I look at the planet, I look at ourselves as individuals. We're a form of planet. And if you look at the macro level of the whole planet, it's a living biosphere. It's got liquid, the oceans, it's got things that breathe like lungs, the forests and our forests and jungles. And of course, it's got the atmosphere. And these things are in fine-to-be tuned balance with each other over the last few billion years. And then man comes along and starts puffing CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, and we have this thing called the greenhouse effect. And it's blindingly obvious that it's very much akin to the smoker who comes to the doctor and he's puffing away and coughing and saying, "Doc, I'm short of breath and I'm coughing and I get these seasonal exacerbations, and what do you think?" And I say, "Well, probably you want to quit the smoking." It's the same with this. Planet Earth has got a fever. Got a fever, for sure. We were about 0.8 to 1 degree over the last 150-year baseline. So it's clearly got a fever, and it's clearly developing an acidosis, that are acidifying. That's because CO2, almost 100 million tons of it every day, gets pumped up in the atmosphere. It combines with water vapor, gets rained into the oceans as carbonic acid. CO2 plus H2O equals carbonic acid. It's a weak acid. But if you put 500 billion tons of carbonic acid into the oceans the last 100 years, well, guess what? Your oceans start acidifying. And that, of course, then accelerates all sorts of problems in terms of the disruption of our marine systems. So overall, we are having an emergency. The emergency is with a patient. The patient's called planet Earth. And unless we act, and we act soon and fast, we're going to overload the buffer systems if we haven't already. So we need to stop the smoking. To bring it back to the COVID-19. COVID-19 is almost a direct result of climate change, or not climate change specifically, but of the disruption of our environment. It's humans coming to close contact with wildlife in a setting that we shouldn't. And it's a question of respect for nature and respect for the environment. And what I would like to see is world leaders, all world leaders, really understand the urgency that patient planet Earth is sick. And once you've got symptoms, there's clearly something wrong and you need to fix it. And the obvious way to fix it, just stop the smoking, stop the carbon emission. And we can do that. We've got the technology. So my hope is that after this COVID-19, where we decimation, of many healthcare, systems, that we actually address the bigger challenge, which is the environmental disruption caused by CO2 emissions and methane emissions. Personally, I'm generally interested in health and wellness, and I think that there's a great deal we can do to prevent prevent illness by thinking about how to keep our immune system optimized. And I describe to my friends that are interested, and I've put out on LinkedIn, something that went quite wide. I was quite surprised about the 5 pillars to optimize your immune health. And the things that everybody can do and that everybody should be aware of. But we need to find ways to help us sleep better, sleep Your good sleep is fundamentally important. Your nutrition, which also relates to your microbiome, is also critically important. We should not be eating processed foods. We should not be eating sugar, added sugar. I believe that sugar is one of the, particularly processed sugar, you know, the stuff you find like sweetened white bread. I mean, that's like, in my view, lethal.
Right.
I don't let my children eat that. So sleep, nutrition, exercise is fundamental. So not just aerobic, but also muscle building, as well as stretching. Then de-stressing, keeping your mental health very strong, particularly during COVID-19. I've done a lot of work on the hypothalamo-pituitary-adrenal axis. Your adrenal glands produce cortisol. That's one of the most important immune regulators in the body. And if you get stressed, your whole what's called HPA gets what I call discombobulated, and it changes the set point for the cortisol production by your adrenals, regulated by your production of cortisol releasing factors from your pituitary gland. And so that's
so interesting.
That is really important, that you need to stay in balance, stress. And there's all sorts of new stuff that's coming out that in relation to how to keep yourself in balance. And it's, you know, lots of various, you know, apps. But overall, there's some exciting stuff coming down the track that I'm personally very interested in. And then finally, I'd say what we're doing here is connecting during the COVID. Stay connected, because the fifth pillar is love and connection. We are gregarious primates. Part of our evolutionary biology is that we cooperate. We always love. We love to get together in groups. That's what's made this whole thing so painful and made people, you know, and anxious, is that we can't get together in our social groups. So that fifth pillar is important. And find yourself, your group, your community, and stay connected and contribute, help and connect and love one another.
Just as a final question, I mean, if you mentioned it actually throughout the interview, but if there's one positive thing that we could take away from this entire pandemic, what do you think it would be?
That we're all interconnected.
Wonderful.
We're all reliant on one another.
Wonderful. Okay.
And that we live on one planet.
All right.
We need to protect that planet. It's precious, and it deserves our attention.
All right. Fantastic.